Yes, that's good. Azril, you have a sound check from you as well?
Sounds perfect.
Yeah, but I want to hear you as well. That's why I'm asking. Your sound is also good. Nobody's whispering. So welcome to the Café con Paulo Freire podcast, Learning Life and Liberation. We have been doing Café con Paulo Freire here in Uppsala, Sweden since 2021. We started in September on the 100-year anniversary of Paulo Freire's birthday, I think. You came with this initiative, Azril, and then we had very different sessions over the years, and it's been very fun. I should also say that Paulo Freire and the pedagogics of Paulo Freire was an important part also of CEMUS when CEMUS started in the 90s with student-led education. So that's an extra fun aspect for us as well to do this. I should also introduce myself. So I'm Daniel Mossberg. I'm lead outreach coordinator and educational coordinator here at CEMUS, which is the Center for Environment and Development Studies. And that's a center at Uppsala University here in Sweden, like I mentioned. What we try to do with the podcast, or what I set out kind of like a very short manifesto for the whole thing, is also we've been very good at talking, and academics and thinkers and however we want to describe ourselves are very good at talking, but we wanted also to bring in a practical aspect to give something back also to educators, activists, and others out there listening. So that's also something I'll remind you of and come back to in all of this. And also now from this autumn, we're doing a podcast. So the first episode is available online and other platforms that you can listen to it, which was really good. And that's also a long introduction of you, Azril, and your life and your connection with Freire and the pedagogics of Freire and the world we're in right now. I think I'll stop there because podcasts have too long introductions, so let's get going with a round. Do you want to say something very brief about yourself as well, Azril?
Short. I make 82 years very short. Hello, everyone. I think we know pretty much everyone. What can I say? Engaged academic. Always put one foot in academia since I started, and still an activist every day until the last drop of my blood.
Thank you.
I am Walter Kohan. I'm very happy to be at this Café con Paulo Freire. And I was wondering about the learning life and liberation. I was wondering why learning is a verb and life and liberation are not verbs, and how would it look like if we read learning, living, and liberating? And what's the relationship between them? Learning to live, learning to liberate, liberating learning, liberating life. What are we doing here?
Nice.
That's very good.
It's a good question.
Yeah, I would take this as a guiding question also for the work that we're doing here at Centro Paulo Freire in Vienna, Austria. We're very happy to have you guys here visiting us from South America. Someone coming by Sweden, the other one coming in directly from Brazil. And it's a great pleasure for us to have you here and to be also connected to Uppsala, Sweden, because I think Freire's pedagogy is something that we need in the whole world, and especially in Europe. I think there's especially in the field of education, he doesn't have the presence that he should have, and especially here in Vienna, we are working to give him more presence in that field and beyond. So yeah, I'm really happy to be able to discuss with you today, and looking forward to an interesting session.
And do you want to say something more about the Paulo Freire Week that you're organizing and also your center, just to set us off to why we're here?
Yes, of course, yeah. Walter and Azril are visiting us for a Freirian week that we are organizing this November in Vienna, and we are right in the middle of this week. So Wednesday is now the peak day, but still there's two more talks to go and one symposium which will last the whole day on Friday. And our idea is to have those people here from South America to also make us question our own approaches towards education and towards life, because what we know is that Freire always wanted to transform the world, and we know we have to make an impact and transform something if we want to make sure that life is still possible on this planet. So this week shall be about getting a lot of inspirations from people who have been knowing Freire for a long time and have dedicated a lot of their time to work with his concept and ideas. And in general, at the Centro Paulo Freire in Vienna, we are a civil society organization that works closely related to academia, but also our approach is to get the knowledge out of the academic circle and have people involved from all parts of society.
Okay, thank you so much. We should start also, we always had, when doing other podcasts, the same as a bit of a longer answer and an in-depth question, and also from your outline of this podcast today, Azril. But let's start with you, Walter, and you also picked apart the subtitle of the podcast, which is really good. That's a good entry point in all of this. But also to get a more of an introduction of you, basically, how you became engaged in the issues you're working with now, and also how you came in contact with Paulo Freire and his work through your academic career and in your life in general.
Right. Well, I need to say that it's not for so long that I've been engaging in writing and thinking more committedly and more intensely with Paulo Freire. Symbolically, I was born in Argentina and I arrived to Brazil 5 days after Paulo Freire died, the 7th of May, 1997.
He died May 2nd.
Right.
That's
so
my birthday.
Yes, so I come 5 days after the 7th. So, and that time I was visiting professor at the University of Brasilia, and I stood 5 years in Brasilia, and then the last 20 in Rio de Janeiro. And also, to be sincere, the circles of Paulo Freire, I was kind of skeptical in many senses, because in some respects, I was not so invited to be inside, in terms of I feel something like a group, like a church, like a sect. So I was kind of distant, and this is something I unfortunately has gone through the figure of Paulo Freire in Brazil. It seems that you need to be. It seems you need to love or to hate Paulo Freire. So it seems that there are people in favor and against, and that's not, in my opinion, that's not helpful, because Paulo Freire is an extraordinary man, an extraordinary figure to think with, and usually when you are taken by these feelings of hate, you cannot think very much. You are like. You cannot see, you cannot perceive. So I could say that when the hate against Paulo Freire took an unacceptable dimension in terms of the Bolsonaro government, when Bolsonaro was arrived as president of Brazil with a platform saying that the main aim of his educational program was to expel the ideology of Paulo Freire from Brazilian education, I think this was completely unacceptable, and I needed, and I feel committed to take a public voice and to write and to have a more active position in this debate.
Mm. And what in life also led you to education and into academia? Was there specific things that got you involved in that?
Well, in 2017, I took a sabbatical of 1 year that I dedicated to write a book on Paulo Freire, which was Paulo Freire More Than Never or More Than Ever. It's interesting that in English you can translate both, and as a philosophical biography. And since then I work at the State University of Rio, and my relationships to the Paulo Freire world in Brazil has deepened and has gone close, and I took part in different activities and in different interventions, both inside and outside university, related to Paulo Freire's work and life.
All right. And I think also the title Learning Life and Liberation that you just remixed, we just have to rename the podcast, right, Azril, because it's we don't want to have life and liberation be passive in this process, and learning be the only active part. Okay. Azril, did you have a follow-up on that, or?
Yeah, I could begin with a provocative question by Walter. Just trying to make some meaningful reflection. So, learning is a lifelong process. And the lifelong process can be to reproduce, as Isvan Mezaros says, the world that we don't want, the world of oppression, exploitation, but also a way to bring about the world we want, the possible world that humanity and the planet needs. So that was one way to connect. At the same time, this life learning process as a process, and this is one line that I like about Paulo Freire, is that we are becoming. This is this phenomenological approach that I like. And then we are becoming for what? To be oppressed and be oppressors, or to liberate ourselves from the old crap, the old conditioning, what Freire called unlearning, unconditioning the self, untraining, or to rescue our creativity, our power, our understanding, our consciousness, in order to transform the world. So that would be one first line. And the second, I agree fully with Walter, because as an old-timer, and this is a long story, I was able to be enchanted and disenchanted, and to the extent that first I was privileged to have been in touch with the different groupings of the sect, so to speak. In the beginning, it was when Freire was in exile, gently pushed out by the military dictatorship in Brazil. And that's an important point in history, because people associate neoliberalism with Pinochet and Friedman and the Chicago School. No, it started in Brazil in the mid-60s. It's very important to remember that. And then Freire was Minister of Education, and then he went to Chile, and he was working in ICIRA, Instituto de Investigación y Capacitación de la Reforma Agraria, and they came with the United Nations to Peru, with FAO, to support the agrarian reform in Peru. So that's how physically we met with him. But before, it was a book that is not, most people mention the pedagogy of the oppressed, which is fine. But Extensional Communication is a very important book. It's about communication. And the book, I think, was even published in English first, Extension, All Communication. Extension is persuasive communication. It's monological communication, like me talking too much. But then it's publicity, propaganda, education, psychotherapy, and so on and so forth. And the alternative to extension that he sees as extended oppression from the centers of knowledge research to the users of knowledge. And then he calls that communication, meaning dialogue. So I think it's quite an important piece. So in Peru, and you try to cut me if I speak too long. His main task was to support the literacy program. Augusto Salazar Bondit is not well known even by Peruvians today, brilliant. In Sweden, they regard it as the most meaningful, radical educational reform in the world. Okay? So, but he came to our group trying to design our training, not only peasants, but agrarian agents for agrarian reform. So he dropped something with us. He said, you should use big media, radio, television, whatever, in a dialogical form. Goodbye. So we were left with the task. What do we do? So we did create the peasant radio forms for agrarian reform, because radio was cheap, available all over Peru. And then the form was like study circles, so they call them Círculos de Cultura in the Northeast, working with the ligas camponesas, ligas campoesas, peasant leagues. So we tried beginning in 69, we lasted till 76. After there was a counter, you could say, a reactionary coup that moved Peru back to the right after 74, but rapidly after 76. Okay, so that's one thing. I think Freire would be very sad, if not depressed, by seeing how there were controversies between, let's say, Torres in the States and trying to remember Gutierrez in Costa Rica, who started with eco-pedagogics. And then his second wife, Anita, and the Paulo Freire Institute, where I was linked, and resigned for similar reasons twice. And I think it is good to be critical the way Walter has been, in the sense that we are still trapped in old patterns of competition, maybe property rights. That was the problem with Anita. And then I was also very close to Carlos Torres in Mexico, who was one of the Mexican Paulo Freire, in addition to Arturo, whom I didn't know. And I actually tried to make a bridge between Moacir and Carlos Torres in a meeting in Guadalajara. It didn't work. Carlos had side with Anita, and it didn't work, but at least the attempt was done to, make bridges through this kind of shed, noise that we don't need. So the human factor should be acknowledged, and that includes us as well. So maybe that's enough on that.
Yeah. Does anyone want to build on that or jump in?
Yeah, for me, if I can add something to what you were saying, it's always a pity to see that there's so much conflict on the legacy of Paulo Freire, because the way I got to know his thought was just very different, because very different. You also got to know him at a certain point of your life, but knowing about all this controversy that has been there, it sometimes make dealing with this a bit harder, I guess. And for me, it was just, I was in Chile doing a master's in Santiago de Chile and Universidad de Chile in 2017, just before the social movement, the Estallido Social, broke out in 2019, and you could already see that the students were protesting, that people knew that.
That's a beautiful student movement.
Yeah, it was. And they were very much connected to Freire. And so I got to know him by the social movements, and I was like, who is this person? Because before that, I had studied to become a teacher in Austria, and all of my 4 years of teacher education, I'd never heard about Freire. And I get to Chile, and suddenly I think, wow, there's some very impressive and inspiring statements of Freire that they were using in their protests, that they were writing down on their banners. And I was like, okay, I have to get to know this person, I know who that is. Someone who lived a long time ago, and still, like for me then, it felt like a long time ago, and still people are referring to him. And he's so alive, and he's I think this is the kind of energy that we also want to get here in Austria, and it would be cool, like if he could be more well known in Europe, and if he could, and not that we don't focus so much on the conflicts about it between different schools of thought that want to have him on this side or the other. It's a challenge, yeah, but I like Walter's approach, and just working with the words that are there, working with the works, the books, and trying to formulate our own questions that we have. And this is, I mean, it can be so inspiring to have an approach that enables people to ask questions. And I think, yeah, that's the problem of the medium of podcast, because you can't really include your listeners and tell them to ask questions. But this is, I think, for me, the most important thing I learned from Freire, and that I feel is now been taken to Austria with you guys. And that's why I'm grateful to have you here, and I hope we can elaborate more on this.
Yeah,
because one thing that for me is an important thing that Azril was saying is that we have to unlearn things also, because schools were not built, at least in my country, they were not introduced, they were not conceptualized to liberate, not at all. In Austria, I think the schools date back to the 18th century, when the emperor decided to make public education for everybody available, but not to form conscious citizens, but to make sure that the army and the industry have enough supply of workforce that at least knows how to read and write, but that's it.
Yeah. Could I jump in here, Azril? Because this unlearning theme is...
After you, I want to jump on what David just said.
Yeah.
No.
Do you want to do a short comment? Because it's a perfect bridge to the next part of this that I wanted to ask about as well. But did you have a short comment, Azril? We can just weave that into here.
Yeah. To David and then to Walter as well. I was very surprised in Berlin, and I was with Chico Whitaker, and listened to where was the first Department of Public Education in Germany. It was in the Ministry of Interior. I mean, couldn't be more self-evident. Social control. It was like, wow. And then for Freire, education is to domesticate, to conform, or to liberate. So there was bingo. That was one comment. And yeah, inspiration. So one question or reflection is how Freire realized that hope was a very important political variable at the time of hopelessness. And if he realized that in the late 90s, today, one of the big problems in the moral environment, social culture, is hopelessness. And hopelessness very easily leads to skepticism, cynicism, and then we become paralyzed. So his pedagogy of hope is quite interesting. Now, after the Second World War, people were also very hopeless. And then in theology, German theology created the theology of hope. And then from Latin America, Gustavo Gutierrez came with theology of liberation. But then Freire came with the pedagogy of hope. So it's interesting to see this historically as well, which I think is a missing piece in today's education. People are living with information from social media, and they lack the historic density to make sense of things. And just to finish this last thing, in 2018, I read that Bolsonaro had vowed to burn Paulo Freire's books publicly the way Hitler did with what he didn't like, to Jewish, to something. So my response was that year to write about Freire in different realms, in 3 different. So that was my intellectual rebellion against Bolsonaro to begin with.
Okay, great. We should, I think that's good as a general startup of all of this, but I wanted to build on both your work, Walter, but also what you said, David, about the theme of unlearning, which we can turn in different directions. But I'm thinking also the theme you have for today, if I'm reading the program right, is Paulo Freire, childhood and a revolutionary education. So that's what you're doing later today, right? Yeah. That sounds familiar. Yes. But also what I think it was Ken Robinson who did his videos and also books. He's from the UK originally, but he lived in Los Angeles. And he had these videos about how we in school lose things along the way, how we're kind of through schooling learning how to become almost less human. We lose certain capacities, certain ways of living in the world, but also relating to each other and relating to the world. So, and that connects to the theme of unlearning and also connecting maybe to Freire as well. So, Walter, what is your kind of understanding of a child or the understanding of a human being, and also in relationship to learning and education?
For me, the idea of childhood is very important to connect, to understand, and to relate to Freire's thinking and life in many ways. Childhood is also a very interesting idea because usually we think about childhood in terms of a lack from the word infancy, which comes from the Latin infant. We think child as not speaking, as not having a voice. And we usually think education as the formation of the child into the adults we dream with, the responsible adult, the democratic adult, etc. Usually we think education as abandoning childhood, as turning childhood into adult. But Freire is one of these great figures that help us to reconnect or unlearn all these ideas about childhood and adulthood, and to reconnect and invent another form of childhood. Childhood not as an age I'm speaking about, but childhood as a time. This for Freire was very, very meaningful. And just as an anecdote, in a conference, in a lecture in the University of São Paulo, when Freire was 67 years old, it was a conference about education and human rights. Freire said that one of the best things that he had done in his life, even better than the books he has written, and Paulo Freire has written wonderful books, so this might be a very good thing he did, was to keep alive the child he was and the child he could not be. And this is extraordinary. Keep alive the child he was and the child he could not be. So that childhood is not something we educate, but it's something that helps us to educate if we keep it alive. So we need our childhood alive, not to turn childhood into another thing, but to learn from the strength of the curiosity, the creativity, the unquietness of a child. So, and I also remember another thing that is connected with this, that Freire more than once said, when asked about his method, that he truly didn't have a method, but that what he had was curiosity and political commitment with the rest. And I understand this as saying what I always had is childhood, and political commitment. So childhood is something extraordinary for educators, not to educate, but as a condition to maintain alive in themselves in order to educate people of any age. This is just a childhood of I could say lots of things, but this is just a childhood to think together about childhood.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
You cut me short. You know me. This is why one of the first things that the church did when they came to Latin America was to educate, with strong emphasis on women, because males looked with the church as something more female-ish, womanish. So be the modern state, Germany having the Ministry of Education department, was not a ministry, in the Ministry of Interior, or the church doing that, the intention for social control. If you control the mind, you control the behavior, right? And we see it today as a very crucial issue. So that was one point. And then, interesting, go to the beginning of the 19th century. And then you had two movements that were very important. The Back to Nature, the Narodnikim in Russia, Wandervogel in Germany, the Boy Scouts in the UK. And then a philosopher of education, very important in Northern Europe, was Schliemann. And people don't know much about Schliemann, but he defined the contours of public education, discipline. And discipline to the point of torture. So now I go back to Rousseau. Moacir Gadotti, that is still the general director of the Paulo Freire Institute. I smile because I don't believe in bureaucracies. That's one reason I resigned to the Paulo Freire Institute. But he writes beautifully. He's very smart, writes beautifully. He goes to Rousseau, and Rousseau puts what is the tripod of what we call learning teaching. It's oneself, others, significant others, teachers, parents, whatever, and other things that could be natural things or artifacts created by humans. So in this trio, the key thing is what you mentioned, the autonomy and the curiosity of the child. Now, but this is interactive with others. Now, who are the others? You see, they are the teachers for good and bad. Now, these significant others, these teachers, can invite the child to be him or herself, to be a child, to be oneself, or to deny, to the point of a book called Soul Murder, about the son of this philosopher, Schliemann, who became psychotic, and this is the basis of the theory of paranoia from Freud. So Schliemann, the philosopher, was torturing to discipline his son to the point of psychosis, soul murder. So I think we round up some ideas.
Mm-hmm. And if I build on that as well, because let's start with you, David, this round, if you can hear me over there, because I'm also thinking, how can we then practically put this in practice? I mean, the last two words are revolutionary education. If you have some examples from your experience, David, or how you worked at the Paulo Freire Center in Austria.
I think what's important here, and also like one of the first steps that we have to take, is to talk about the education of educators to get into the teacher education system, because this is like educational science in Austria is very positivist, and it's not en vogue to talk about that education is actually political and that we should have a commitment with the oppressed, as Walter said. And if you never mention these things, if you never think about why do you want to be a teacher? Who are you teaching for? And why did you choose this career? After all, it's just the very base of the whole thing is missing, and that's why our idea is to make people aware of that there's so much more in the world of educational science and of education than just making quantitative studies about which method works and which not. Because of course it's important to make people literate, but it's more important they can only be fully literate, as I would say, if they can read and write the world, not just a text and maybe not even really being able to question it. So
read it to transform it.
Read it to transform it. That's a really good word. And so for us, our idea is always to raise the consciousness. And we are a very small institution. We're very aware of our limits. But still, for example, this week we have the opportunity to go with Walter to the Department of Education and talk to people who will be teachers. We're doing this today, we will do that tomorrow, and on Friday we have the whole day for a symposium. And also on Monday, in the lecture that we were at another institute, the Institute of Development Studies, there were teachers among us, and they were very interested in the way Walter made them question not only their work, but everything related to education, because education is not just what happens in schools. And it was a beautiful experience, and I hope that parting from this experience, like we have this week now, but there's so many other interactions we can have with people, and we have more channels, we have publications, we have a podcast as you guys have too, and we just hope to be more present with that. And what I personally love is to work with children. I do this only voluntarily, and it's not informal education, but informally. But still, it's one of the best things I have in my life, and it always inspires me a lot. And I can feel that I myself am learning so much, and it's a place where I feel most comfortable. I think being able to talk with people and in a mutual process of mutual learning inspire my consciousness and make it more wide. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think also it is very much, I'll get back to you, Walter, but I think it's also that in sometimes, and we're all for having a global perspective or having a very systemic, you focus on system changes and the big changes, and you see a lot of impossibilities in systems. But I think we could do more and focus on the spaces, whether it's the spaces teachers have for changing things, the kind of freedom they still have in the classroom and engaging students. And I think also very concrete examples from, I mean, this is higher education, but it maybe not so different in the structures, at least in the Swedish context, that if you, for example, start a school garden and you have the kids outside, you grow a garden together, you cook with the vegetables that you have out of the garden, that's a very concrete way of changing how you spend the time with your students, for example. And there's a campus garden just next to us here at CMUS, and just encouraging students' curiosity and their activities. So I think also we can be much better in just finding concrete activities and after-school things and more informal things as well.
Yeah, I can suggest you also another example related to one idea that is very important in Freire, which is the idea of questions and questioning. Freire wrote a book with a Chilean educator, Antonio Faundes, that in Portuguese is called Towards a Pedagogy of the Question. And it was translated as the pedagogy of freedom, learning to question. In these books, it inspires lots of suggestions, because usually in our schools, we think that the one who questions is because she doesn't know, and the one who knows answer. But it might be precisely the opposite. And usually we put the questions at the end in order to realize that the one who does not know understood well what the one who knows has taught her. But if we just put this around, and this is also what a revolutionary education might mean, because revolution has an etymological sense of turning around things, of putting things the other way they are. So if we put questions at the beginning, and not as signs of not knowing, but as signs of knowing, and we can also think that a question is not a sign of a learner, but also it could be a sign of a teacher or a teaching. So we could realize that teachers might be much more questioners, might welcome also questioners, and also might stop thinking that they need to answer children's questions. Because as Freire said in that book, when you answer a question, you castrate a curiosity. And precisely the meaning of education is quite the opposite, is to nurture curiosity. So as you say, the example of the food and of the vegetables. So if we could foster classrooms where teachers and students together foster questions, foster curiosity, foster the things that they want to know, instead of trying to find the answers, the end of curiosity, that might also mean a very different type of educational experience.
Can I come in?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. We are conversing about having the next programs with Ivan Illich and then Gustavo Esteva and so on. So that's an interesting point. There was a dialogue between Ivan Illich and Paulo Freire, where Illich wrote and he was advocating the schooling society, because schooling would be the public or private, it didn't matter. It's a way to be elitist, to reproduce inequality and so on. And Freire said we still need to see the schools as a trench. So they published a little book together in this discussion. Something else is how Maria Montessori and Freire regarded education not, as David said, as the education in the classroom, but any place, any space, any spatial, temporal conjunction, it's a learning possibility to reproduce or to bring change. So there is a book published by the Paulo Freire Institute in Portugal, Uma Outra Educação Possível, and the chapter there was, how can we intervene, socio-educational intervene, in order to bring about awareness and change. So those were just some additions to the example. Maybe two cases rapidly, concrete examples.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one was with the open school in the border between Malaga and Granada. And so we did a workshop 2-3 years ago with the children, ages 4 till 8, 9, and with the parents. With the children, it was to pair, and the exercise was how to listen better to each other. So they paired. David will ask, will listen to what you want to say, and vice versa. And then they will share with the group. So but then we learn as we go. I found out there were too many children, better have smaller groups, and also age groups, because their understanding can vary. With the parents, it worked quite well. So that's one recent experience. The other one was in Eriksberg school next to where I live, and it was a workshop with 600 from age 9 to 15. So we divided them in 4 big groups, 150, and it was about school democracy and culture of peace. So to deal with the question of school democracy, we asked the students to say who influences their thoughts, their behaviors. And so in the blackboard, we fill the blackboard, my mother, my best friend, the prime minister, whoever. So it was the provocative question, and then they bombarded with answers, but still we didn't. Then we discussed, what does it mean? It means power, or some people over other people. And this is what democracy is about. Democracy is about power. So if relations are more equal, you equalize power. It's more democratic. It's more equal, less democratic. And then very shortly, the culture of peace, because Freire got the UNESCO award for peace educator in 1974. And so he was dealing also with peace education. It's interesting to read his speech in UNESCO that year.
But I'm thinking also now for the symposium you have on Friday, and I read the target audience bullet points you have included there is very similar to what we're trying to do in the podcast or in this series. But one of them is activists from different fields trying to support empowering the oppressed. And there's a lot of things we can say about activism, and we talked about that before, Azril, but who then are the oppressed? And this is difficult, different in different context.
We can think about different questions that this question make us think. So maybe we can find other questions that can help us to think the question, who are the oppressed now? Because, for example, I could say 3 or 4 questions, and maybe my colleagues here can add even. Is still the oppressed and the dichotomy enough to think about our contemporary reality? Each time we have an oppressed, we have an oppressor. Could an oppressed be at the same time an oppressor? What is the social productivity of reality in our days of the oppression? What's the relationship between oppression and neoliberalism and neocapitalism? What are our institutions doing in terms of dealing with oppressions we have in contemporary life?
Can I be only oppressed if I'm among, let's say, 1% or 10% of the people in my country, in the world? Can I be oppressed if I am of power in a company, for example, or in a school system? Can I be of the oppressed if I'm in a family, in a position of power? So I think it's also about really the social relations that come up in this field.
Right? It's okay?
Yep. The sound is working. The image is okay.
I want to come from another window. This is it has never been publicly, but my view after both reading Marx and Freire is that the pedagogy of the oppressed is an answer to Marx's theory of alienation. And basically, we're not born alienated. We are born very much in communion, child, mother, or whatever, but then we become ourselves. And this is interaction, this is child, where you are defined who you are, you're personified, you are so and so, boy or girl, or you are, Catholic, or you're Jewish. So you are identified, your national identity, and so on and so forth. But then basically, the pedagogy of the oppressed is a way to disalienate, to take away the internalized enemy that you can learn from within. And this has to do, for example, with colonized identities. In this struggle of decolonization in North America, they were very adamant about decolonizing identity because people had internalized the identity of the colonizer. This is something that was hinted by Walter, where you can be oppressed, you can oppress yourself and then also of others. You can be a victim and then a victimizer in a very unconscious way that needs to be made aware. Pedagogy of the oppressed, I think, was a very clever, not explicit, Marx theory of alienation. You become alienated out of your work. If you live in a capitalist society, then you become alienated to compete with each other. You are alienated from nature. Remember modern times with Chaplin. And eventually you become alienated from yourself. If you're alienated from yourself, you have lost power. So this alienation, then pedagogy of the oppressed, and this is where hope and pedagogy of hope, I think, makes sense. I've met personally a Palestinian psychoanalyst in West Bank. He was psychoanalyst. We discussed, and people that were in IRA prison, and they discovered Freire in prison, and discovering and having a study circle in prison gave them hope to come out. So relating alienation, disalienation, and hope, and how Freire was able to weave a kind of, not answers, but as he read, and in the books he read, he has comments. They've made a book about his comments, which, I don't know, these days had 3 days in one, I don't know, because he was doing other things as well. So there was kind of trying to summarize.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things to be said on that topic. And Walter, you countered with counter questions, but I think it's been one of those things from activists that you sometimes construct fantasies of who are the oppressed and who are you going to liberate. But it's a big question, and it's kind of hard maybe with the time we have left, but also how the information landscape over the last years have kind of shifted a lot, and whether it's conspiracy theories, the far left and the far right collapsing into each other. So it's yeah, and maybe also the oppressed includes the world kind of beyond humans as well. But that is another and a big question. We should wrap this up. Is there anything else, looking very also practically in all of this, things you wanna, if people want to start on the theme of Freire or the theme of revolutionary education or unlearning, is there some kind of starting point, a book, a text, a video, something the listeners can start with, and we can also include in the show notes of this?
What I would like to add on what Azril just said, and what also Walter planted, is that I think you should also consider the role of the oppressor, because Freire also says that being an oppressor is not something that is something that prevents people from being fully human. So it's not only about liberating the oppressed, but also the oppressor experience a constriction of their whole humanity. So if we think about the revolutionary education and a revolution, it's not only about the oppressed, it's also about the oppressors who, for some reason, by their behavior and by their position of power can't be fully humanized. And this is also very beautiful figure of thought, I think, that Freire introduces to us and gives us a lot of responsibility also if we work or if we as activists try to transform things. And yeah, I think starting, we on our website, for example, we have some videos of Paulo Freire where you can, I think it's always important also to find out what kind of person he was and how he spoke, how he thought, how he taught, how he was teaching in class or at university. And we have some videos in the collection, so this is something I can really recommend. And if you want, you can later send the link to the listeners or add it to the recording of the podcast.
I make a quick comment.
Yeah, go ahead. You're most welcome.
Don Samuel Ruiz was a bishop in Chiapas, and he just traced Freire saying, we don't want to kill you, bourgeois capitalists. We want to liberate you from the role of being an oppressor. And that's very complimentary. That's the Teología India. It was called translating Indian theology or theology of the Indians, related to the Zapatistas. Yeah.
Thank you. Walter, you're last.
For my last, remember Azril statement of the importance of hope and hoping. Freire made of hope a verb. In English, it is a verb. But in Portuguese and Spanish, we need to create the word esperanzar, because hope was just a noun, esperanza. So remembering and sharing this importance of the hoping in this very, very difficult moment of the world, and also the idea of questioning and doubting and being curiosity. I think for an activist, this might be two nice friends. In one hand, hoping, and in another, questioning, and also self-questioning. What's our role and our relationship and our place in this new world we are hoping to begin?
Something? Is there time?
There is time for a short comment.
Yeah. Hope, tenderness, loving, but it's also something that Freire shared with Gandhi, which is not to confuse vengeance, anger with indignation. Because this, Anita wrote a book about pedagogy of indignation, because as Gandhi would say, without indignation, you have lost the power to respond to injustice. And we want to transform an unjust world to be more just. So I think Freire and Gandhi had that line in common.
So I think we'll leave it at that. And thank you so much for taking part in this.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. We'll try to connect with you.
Yes, let's connect with each other, and there's a ton of other things. We have pedagogical projects that we can apply for funding, and there's other exchanges within the EU that we can look at. Absolutely.